10 days to turn himself in as Trump slams the DA, Fani Willis, as failed and promises to flood the zone with false details about fraud in the Georgia election, forcing Georgia's conservative Republican governor, Brian Kemp, who, by the way, supported Trump and said he voted for him, prompted him to say, quote, the 2020 election in Georgia was not stolen. For nearly 3 years now, anyone with evidence of fraud has failed to come forward under oath and provide anything in a court of law. Our elections in Georgia are secure, accessible, and fair, and will continue to be as long as I am governor. Well, of course, the facts remain facts, but the fiction, the falsehood, is still believed by tens of millions, many tens of millions of Americans. And tonight, as Trump and 18 others have 10 days to turn themselves in, facing serious criminal charges, and by the way, serious prison time, as in possibly more than 20 years if convicted, one of them is making a move for a get-out-of-jail-free card. Mark Meadows, Trump's former chief of staff, filing a court motion to move his case to federal court in an effort to get it dismissed. Now, we're going to have more on this breaking development in just a moment, because the reality here is that the clock is ticking. Fani Willis says she would like to try Trump in the next 6 months, which would be just one case against Trump of many going to trial in the winter and spring. Just think about it. In all, Trump, who is by far the front runner in the Republican presidential field, is facing an astounding 91 criminal total charges in 4 criminal cases. Let's just say this again. Can you imagine? The person who's right now sort of in line to get that Republican nomination is facing 91 criminal charges. It is historical. It is incredible. It is astounding. Well, in a moment, I'm going to speak to Trump's former White House lawyer, Ty Cobb. But first, I want to go out front live to Paula Reed, still at that Atlanta courthouse. And Paula, now 10 days to turn themselves in. But these breaking developments in the past few minutes here, what more can you tell us about this filing by Mark Meadows, who was so crucial and so central in all of this, and what's next in the case?
So, Aaron, we've learned that in this filing, Mark Meadows is attempting to move this state prosecution to the federal level. His attorneys believe that if they are successful getting this move to the federal jurisdiction, that they will be able to get it dismissed. Now, even if he's successful in getting this moved to a federal court, it doesn't move the entire 19 defendant case. This is something that would have to happen defendant by defendant. And we've learned in our reporting that multiple other defendants are also expected to attempt this. Rudy Giuliani said today in an interview that he's going to try to get his case moved to federal court. And we also know that former President Trump is expected to try as well. Now, even if they're not successful in getting it dismissed, it's just impossible to know if that will prevail. If they can get this moved to federal court, the one big advantage for the former president and his allies would be the jury pool. Because here in Fulton County, the jury pool skews heavily Democratic, but the federal jury pool would draw from a more broad selection of people. So there would be at least a slight advantage there. There is also the possibility that anyone who is convicted could be eligible for a pardon from a future president. Now, right now, Aaron, right in front of us, they have just 10 days for their surrender, and then a judge will set dates for these initial appearances.
All right, Paula, thank you very much at that Atlanta courthouse. And out front now, Ty Cobb, the former Trump White House lawyer. So, Ty, I want to start with Paula's reporting here. Mark Meadows wants to change the venue to try and avoid the charges, open himself up possibly to a pardon, right, all of those things. He is charged here in the Georgia case, but not by Jack Smith in the federal DOJ case. So do these charges by Fani Willis change anything for what's at stake for Mark Meadows if he did cooperate with Jack Smith on the federal case, as I know you think he did?
Yes, I don't have any doubt that he cooperated in the federal case. And the fact that, he didn't have immunity or whatever deal he got with the feds with Fani Willis does not indicate that, he did not cooperate with the feds. I think he was very active on their behalf. With regard to his attempt to move the venue and move the case to federal court, of the 19 defendants, I think Meadows is the only person with an arguable chance of succeeding. He's charged in the RICO count and then 2 counts related to the telephone call with Brad Raffensperger, where Trump asked for one more vote than they had. As I believe his motion reflects, he's charged essentially with setting up and attending meetings, doing scheduling, and going to a federal building, which is actually not compelling for keeping it in state court. I think there is a chance, not necessarily a great chance, but there's a decent chance that Mark Meadows' case could be removed. Trump can never be removed. None of the other defendants actually have the benefit of federal service during the time of the offenses that would qualify them under this statute.
So, all right, it's an interesting view that you think Meadows has a chance. I know you're not overemphasizing that, but you do think he has a chance. So what about how this moves? I mean, Fani Willis made it clear she wants to move fast, wants to get going within 6 months. Is there any chance, first of all, Ty, that Fani Willis goes before Jack Smith?
No. There's no chance, in my view, that Fani Willis goes, within 2 years.
2 years?
There will be, yes, that would be my estimated time. There are 19 defendants. There are different charges. Everybody will have motions galore. I disagree with some of the reporting I heard today where people were saying not only do they have the motions, but then they'll be able to appeal the motions. The reality is you don't get to appeal a lot of trial court motions absent the permission of the judge or a constitutional opportunity. So I wouldn't worry so much about that, but this case will take a long time to prepare. There will be motions for severance, motions to dismiss. And if it takes her, 2 years, I mean, heaven forbid that Trump wins the presidency, then there will be a fight to the Supreme Court over whether she can proceed against the sitting president during his term. That's an issue that's never been resolved. The federal prosecutors are not allowed to indict or prosecute a president during his term. But as to state court prosecutors, that issue has never been resolved and could delay things quite some time.
So what is your bottom line in terms of the quality of the case? I mean, the timing here, obviously, you're saying would be quite protracted at best. But what's your bottom line?
I think this is a very,
yeah.
I think this is a very effective indictment. Don't get me wrong. The 161 specific acts. She's got a lot of proof as to the bulk of those. My only criticism, I disagree with Chris Christie, but in a principled way. I think it was important to Georgia and certainly important to her to have Trump as a defendant. It would be a little hard to explain to the jury why you have all these acolytes, but not the kingpin in a RICO case. So I think she did the right thing in indicting Trump. I think she did add some pretty fringe defendants. I'm not sure Jenna Ellis, who was never making policy decisions or independent decisions, or some of the local attorneys who were merely, serving the wishes of Sidney Powell and Rudy Giuliani. And I'm not sure she can prove that, they believed that they were being lied to. I think there's some fringe defendants that raise issues for her. But the core of this against Trump and the significant defendants is a very, very strong case.
All right, so Trump says he's going to be giving a, quote, major news conference, his words, obviously. He says he will present a large, complex, detailed, but irrefutable report on the presidential election fraud which took place in Georgia. Of course, Ty, there was no fraud in Georgia. Right? Brian Kemp is as conservative as a Republican comes, and he has been very loud and clear that there's no fraud in Georgia. Audit. It's ridiculous to even go through it. But yet this is what the former president is going to do next week and to try to flood the airwaves with. What is he doing with that?
This is all Trump, PR. This is, generating chaos. Frankly, there's a good chance that whatever document he produces ends up as evidence against him. It could even end up, as the basis for an obstruction count against the author, because it's likely to be fiction and solely for the purpose of contaminating the jury pool. The reality is, Brian Kemp and Brad Raffensperger each deserve, a pat on the back for the courage that they've shown, putting, country before party. And I think, the absence of evidence of of fraud is patently obvious to anybody who's followed the Georgia events, and certainly anybody who reads this indictment will be able to see how fraudulently those claims were made.
All right, Ty Cobb, thank you very much. I appreciate it.